Hi, everyone.
Hi, all. We've seen in the two prior segments that the spontaneous work of the Lord gets going in Antioch. Jerusalem feels that they have to react to this. They want to find out more, so they send Barnabas. Mm-hmm. What's Barnabas going to do? So let's read in Acts 11, 25, 26 what Jerusalem has decided to do and what Barnabas now has decided to do in response to what he sees in Antioch.
So he's been, and now he says, "So he went off to Tarsus to make a thorough search for Saul. And after he found him, he brought him to Antioch. It thus came about that for a whole year they gathered together with them in the congregation and taught quite a crowd. And it was first in Antioch that the disciples were by Divine Providence called Christians."
ESV translates this, "So Barnabas went to Tarsus to look for Saul, and when he had found him, he brought him to Antioch. For a whole year they met with the church and taught a great many people, and in Antioch the disciples were first called Christians." Now Maclaren comments on this way: "The third and fourth sections of the lesson must be passed by with slight notice. The former, that is these verses we just read, 25 and 26, narrates the growth of the progress of the gospel in the new field. Barnabas did not go back to Jerusalem to report, but remained at Antioch to become a co-operator in the work which he had been sent to investigate. Note the 3 points specified. First, the introduction of Saul as Barnabas' helper. The same quickness to recognize God's grace and self-forgetful joy in it, which Barnabas showed as to the Antioch Christians, he had previously displayed in taking Saul by the hand on his first appearance in Jerusalem. Now remember that Barnabas was the one who brought Saul of Tarsus to Jerusalem the first time back in chapter 9. Mm-hmm. Now, the same Barnabas feels that this was the sphere for the brilliant disciple of Gamaliel, Saul, and sets out for Tarsus to fetch him. Jealousy of younger and more able men is a common fault even among earnest workers. The quick eye to detect and the self-oblivious joy in helping the exercise of powers greater than one's own are not too common among Christian teachers of established position. The conjunction of these two men is a beautiful instance of the harmonious association of mature and nascent ability in the common service of Christ. Saul's seclusion at Tarsus and Arabia was all important for his ripening, as such times are for all young spirits who can have few greater misfortunes than premature accession to positions of publicity and toil. Gardeners put out young plants from greenhouses to harden, and growing talents need the same. The work comes when the worker is ready for it. Capacity is not easily hidden for long. Well for churches in our bustling day, whose Barnabases are on the lookout for Sauls, and whose Sauls prefer to begin their ministry in retired preparation at Tarsus, and yet are not so in love with ease that they refuse to go to Antioch. Now that's a very nice and elegant way of saying that Saul had to get ready for his great work. He's still Saul, and we forget that now about 10 to 12 years has already gone by since he was made apostle to the Gentiles. He's still not out on his first missionary tour.
And also that Barnabas recognizes the need for someone with different talents to come in and help him with this work.
Yeah, but the disconnection with Jerusalem is what you might miss.
Yeah.
So why doesn't Barnabas go back? Well, I think, why would he go back?
Yeah, he can see things are good, and there's, the Lord is with this group, and they need help. Oh, I know the guy to get the help for them.
I know the specific man
who will be
perfect for an apostolate to the Gentiles. Mm-hmm. Barnabas knows that, because after all, he's not a Galilean and he's not a Jerusalem apostle. Mm-hmm. He is from Cyprus himself.
Yeah.
So let's keep in mind, though, that we've got a dozen years at least of preparation of Saul of Tarsus.
Yeah, he's still called Saul, not Paul yet.
And that's very important, because as Maclaren points out in this paragraph, in his day, a bustling Victorian era, and even more so now, Men are often put in positions of responsibility
Too soon.
with very little preparation. Certainly nothing like this. So, in the next paragraph, well, let's read it. This is Luke highlighting the fact of the conclusion of the thought is that this group were now called by Divine Providence in the New World Translation Christians. And was that an official name given to them? He addresses that issue in the next couple of paragraphs.
The second point is the constituting and growth of the Christian community at Antioch. It was a properly constituted church, though no apostles had been near it, for it was a community of believers, and Jesus Christ was in it. It was made up of Gentiles, pure heathen, with only a sprinkling of circumcised Jews. But it was a church, a new center of spiritual life, apart from, and in a very real sense, independent of, that at Jerusalem. Barnabas and Saul carried on its spiritual instruction without apostolic help, and God was with them. The fact of such a community having risen and prospered as it did is full of instruction as to the true functions of the apostolate. The third point is the new name given to the disciples. It is a sign of the considerable conspicuousness of the new movement that the wits of Antioch invented a name for it. The name is significant of much. Philological. It is a hybrid word, for Christ is Greek, and the termination "ian," Latin, meaning adherents, followers, or partisans. So what struck the superficial observers at Antioch as the marked characteristic of the disciples, and as supremely absurd, was that they were the followers of a man who had pretended to be a Messiah, whatever that may have meant.
So there's two major points here that we might easily overlook, which is the nature of the apostolate, as he calls it, the apostolic office. Because the word only means sent forth. So at this point, Barnabas has been sent forth on a specific mission to investigate Antioch. That's all.
Yeah.
The idea of the larger idea of the apostolate, the going out to preach to, well, it will be in the case of Barnabas and Saul, to preach to the Gentiles, that's not happened yet. They're not designated apostles. And we know from the rest of Paul's writings that this apostolate of Paul specifically is disputed by many of the Jerusalem disciples, but not by James, not by the 12 apparently, not by Peter, but by many of the other elders in Jerusalem. So it's a very big point that we should not overlook, that the apostolic office has not yet been approved by Jerusalem. In other words, Saul and Barnabas are not officially apostles at this point for any great work that God is doing in the world. And that goes on being a controversy. And then there's the other aspect, which is who calls them Christians?
It's the non-believers that are observing them call them Christians.
And what do we learn from that?
Well, one thing is a witness. That I knew this verse as a witness about them being called Christians, but I hadn't thought much about the fact that as a witness you think that Jesus came to make God's name prominent, the divine name, and that his followers, of course, that's what name they would be presenting all over the place too, if that's what you think as a witness. But it's obviously not what was observed by the onlookers, because they call him after Christ. So the prominent person in their vision of who these people are following is Christ.
Disciples of Christ, as he points out here. The word itself means, it's a hybrid between Greek and Latin, and it means adherent to or disciple of.
Yeah, and although they thought it was kind of humorous and silly that these people would be following a dead guy, a guy that they think was a false Messiah, that's why they call them that, Christians.
But the name has stuck, and now we have the Christian church, and we're quite happy with that name, the Christian congregation. But it shows you the centrality of Christ. He's the foundation, as Paul puts it later in Corinthians, the one foundation that the church has.
The name that stood out.
And then there's an additional paragraph here which is interesting about the identity again of these people from the standpoint of the onlooker, the unbeliever. The name shows a certain amount of knowledge of what the disciples were. We should all be manifestly Christ's men. But it also shows that it's coiners, that is, the people who are picked up and used this phrase, despise people who could attach themselves to such hazy pretensions as they deemed Christ's claims. And it shows how little they understood the nature of the bond when they dubbed his followers by a word which was shaped in the same fashion as those which designated adherents of philosophic schools or ambitious political leaders. We are Christ's men, but not as Herod's partisans were Herodians. The name was given in scorn. It survives as a name of honor and the highest style of man. And that he has a little addendum, a paragraph here on verses 27 to 30, which gives us the follow-up to the Antioch narrative. So what does it say in the New World Translation, 27 to 30?
Now in these days prophets came down from Jerusalem to Antioch. One of them, named Agabus, rose and proceeded to indicate through the Spirit that a great famine was about to come upon the entire inhabited earth, which for that matter did take place in the time of Claudius. So those of the disciples determined, each of them according as anyone could afford it, to send a relief ministration to the brothers dwelling in Judea. And this they did, dispatching it to the older men by the hand of Barnabas and Saul.
Barnabas and Saul. So we're glad, we rejoice when we look at this addendum to this chapter that there's no break in the relationship between Jerusalem and Antioch.
Yeah, there's a love for their brothers somewhere else.
So Agabus, who we don't hear much about in the rest of the New Testament, is a prophet, and there's other prophets with him coming down from Jerusalem. But this is not as far as we can tell, it's not another apostolic checkup on what's going on in Antioch. But the mutuality of it, I think, is wonderful here.
Yeah, there's obviously a community bond, but it's based on their relationship to God, to Christ, not some tie to a group in a location.
Ecclesiastical authority back.
Yeah, no, they're working independent of one another for Christ.
Well, there is a healthy accountability about this, it seems to me, a mutual blessing, which is the prophets come down and bless the people in Antioch, the new brethren, spiritually, but the desire on the part of the Gentile Christians is to bless their brothers who are having a hard time physically back in Judea with the famine that we know was in the whole world in those days, in the days of Claudius. So the mutual blessing, the organic relationship that's developed here, but not one of subordination or subjection of one church to another.
Yeah.
So in the words of John, one flock, one shepherd, but independent of each other. And that is the Protestant way, and that's one reason Maclaren is so big on this chapter, is that he, being a Baptist, realizes that this is the basic argument between the Eastern Orthodox, the Catholics, and the Protestants, which is the nature of authority. Is there a centralized authority to which all local churches are submissive? And that's the big, of course, reason for the Reformation. So Maclaren, being a Baptist, is staunchly on the side of independence, but recognizing the mutual dependence, the organic nature of our relationship. So we want to read just Maclaren's sum up paragraph here. He says the last section shows the welding together of the Jewish and Gentile elements by the power of brotherly love expressed in help in time of need. That men of Antioch should compassionate hungry Jews and send them aid in the name of brethren marked a revolution in the world's history so profound that it has no parallel, and so far-reaching that its full significance will not be exhausted till all mankind are gathered together in one family of love, because all feel the sacredness of the common relation to the elder brother, of course that's Christ, and through him to the one Father. So we wanted to link on your screen to another section of Ray Franz where he talks about that, well, rather amusing story of how Fred Franz, after the inauguration of the governing body concept in the early 70s, went right out to missionary school at Gilead and dismantled the thing. I think it's humorous but tragic at the same time that effort on behalf of Fred Franz to show what the lack of a biblical precedent for the idea of a governing body, that it never got reprinted in the Watchtower. But we'll put that video on your screen where Fred Franz, the man soon to be president of the Watchtower, goes out and dismantles the governing body.